Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Today we have excited speaker Deb from open source wide, I would say, experience from perspective. She is a senior director in Red Hat, and she's quite, I would say, one of the big names and in the open source. And so excited she accepted to join us over the weekend and to talk about open source program office. So it's hosted with Metabob and GoUp partnership. So today's agenda, we're gonna start a bit with introduction and a bit chit chat, just to a bit have some fun and have some fun questions. And then we will pass to Deb to take over, and then we will have a short break and we will have some Q&A up to 30 minutes, and we will then wrap up and end the session. So quickly about me, I am working currently as a DevOps engineer, and we started the GoUp as a community-driven open source accelerator. We want to as much openness and bring this, and for the folks who are trying to join open source project, just to help them to onboard faster. So that's about the GoUp and Metabob. It's just recently finalized seed round. It's AI-based code reviewer, and it's in partnership with Metabob and the GoUp. And each chapter we have the 10th session, and this is our fifth session, and we do usually over weekends, Saturday and Sunday. So this is briefly, and as mentioned earlier, the active community members, we are gonna give you in the end, if you were able to attend 8 out of 10 sessions, we will give you contributor award, because by joining, asking questions, by helping us to spread the word, it helps a lot for the community in general, for the open source, and we are thankful for you, and we would like to see your name as a contributor as well in this chapter. So let's begin with a chit chat, and I will go for the chit chat. I will ask also Rasim to, so let's first also go to the chit chat, and I think Rasim, can you share the link in the chat? We have the Jamboard, so the question we are asking is what you want to learn from this webinar. And if you go to the second one, and it's again also optional, are you happy and why? Anything fun happened this week? And we would like also to give you some stories. I think we will also share all this in our social channels. So please go ahead and start adding. So I will also add myself. So I guess, yeah. I guess, cool. We see. Anything fun happened? think we have a couple of folks already writing, and I think that it's give you a bit more idea that for the folks, and I think and we also have the poll. We're gonna launch the poll, so please feel free. So
this is great. I'm so glad you do it.
yeah, that's to get some more insights. I think the main also things about the webinar we want to learn about and be more friends. So I think just that's another thing. We try as much to be informal and fun to keep, and at the same time to get some insights, helping to the speaker, helping also for us to know each other more. Otherwise, it wouldn't point. They can just go to YouTube and check the recording. We want more interactivity and more collaboration. So we are just adding small tasks as well. So yeah, I think we have already also some folks already writing the poll, and I think we can I see already 7, 8 people. So we can just also looks most of the folks have less or no idea about the open source program office tab, and it's one of the things really asking more frequently, because I think only few companies are still have this program office, and I think the main reason would be probably they don't have clear idea or the picture that what it's about. So we're gonna see, and I think we can move on. Looks, what time is that? I think it's 10:10. So I reposted the Jamboard, folks, and cool. Let's end the poll and let's share the results, and we're gonna also quickly take a picture of that. So okay, I think we have a bit late folks joining, but it's fine. Last thing, we may need to repost because the folks joining, but we're gonna move on. I think cool. I think let's move on. So we had the poll. What's your open source program office knowledge level? You guys responded. So most of the folks doesn't have much experience. And audience, we are really excited and happy to say that most of our folks are hearing and signing up from the Slack. Again, we are working also in event management system where we will have automate. You won't need for each session to go and sign up. I know it's a bit annoying and you will just need to log in, but we don't have it there yet. So that's why so far we are still using Google Form. Code of conduct, it's very simple. We are here to learn, benefit, contribute, no marketing, selling, competing, equality, and true equality and true diversity, I will say. And also, doesn't matter your role, background, we are here equal, and that's the culture we have since day one in Go, which didn't change and won't change. So photo shooting time, and we will, oh, wow, we are already 19 people. And I will kind of ask you guys and open your cameras, please. And Rasim, can you help us with the picture?
Yeah. Please stop sharing and.
We usually have some sign showing, and I think kind of give some also message in the message. We usually do like equality, but I don't know if you have any preference and any sign you would like. We can try to.
I like equality.
Please stop sharing.
Okay.
Sako, please stop sharing. Sako, stop sharing and need and share your desk. I mean, no, just stop sharing. I will take.
Oh, does it?
Okay. Yeah, just okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think, folks, are you ready? I don't know. This is a sign. I don't know. Oops. not break anything here, but
Yeah.
make sure your
Just
face there.
One more.
So it's true equality. Yeah, cool. Yeah, awesome,
Yeah.
guys.
One more.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, good.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Okay, let's get back. And I think it's my fancy background. So yeah, thank you so much, folks. We are done with the pre-session. And now I'm passing to you, Deb, please. And thank you so much again joining us today.
You bet. Thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna see if I can switch to presentation mode. And think. How's that? Can you see my presentation? All
Awesome.
right. So thanks. So thanks very much. I love the questions up front. That's the first time I've seen that done, and I really like that. Actually, most of the questions are going to be answered that are already in the presentation, but there's a couple I'm going to add a little bit more information so we make sure we get all the questions answered. As Sako mentioned, I'm Deb Bryant. My fancy title is Senior Director. I'm the head of the Open Source Program Office at Red Hat. And before I get started, I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about my background, how I got started. So in the mid-90s, I was a general manager of an internet subsidiary of a big telecom. I was running an ISP. This is really before we were calling anything open source yet, but we were using it, mail, DNS, all the protocols, all open source, all open standards. So I became very familiar and comfortable with the idea that you could build a business on open source much earlier in my career. We acquired a small company in Hawaii called Hawaii Online. And the staff there were very young, and there was a group of Unix sysadmins, all like 17 to 20, that came over with the acquisition. And one of them one evening asked me if he could have permission to work on a project. He was very excited. We were on the 14th floor of a big office building in downtown Portland. It was a secure building, so he couldn't go outside. This is the days where people smoked, but we did it out on the fire hydrant. I'm not smoking anymore, so don't take it as a sign. Anyway, years ago, we sat outside. This is why I remember the conversation so well. He was so excited. He said, this is going to change operating systems. It's called Linux. Can I use my company time to work on the project? And how could I say no? So that was my first contribution to open source, was actually giving someone on my team permission to work on a project. Now, be very clear, I'm not a technical person. Years ago, I could brag that I could program my VCR. That doesn't even matter anymore, but I thought it was fun. So I'm not a technical person, but I've been working and helping projects in different industries, in academia, in the private sector, in the public sector. And today, what we're going to focus on is what I can share with you about open source program offices. But we are going to talk about Red Hat a bit, not because I want to pitch the company to you, because I want you to understand why open source is so important to Red Hat, right? So Red Hat is an enterprise software company. Most of our customers are really quite large, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies and others. We use open source as our software development methodology. So everything that goes out the door is distributed as a supported product for our customers is based on open source. We do all of our work in the upstream. So then you can imagine that our relationship and work with communities is very important. And it sets the roles for the open source program office that's in Red Hat. So our business model then is to provide our customers with support and training and innovation for open source developed software. Sometimes most of the software we work in are projects that we've joined. And to answer the question, how many projects or how big contributor we are, we're one of the world's largest contributors to the Linux kernel and hundreds, if not thousands of other projects, you know, some more, some less. But again, everything that's in our stack of commercially supported products for customer are also all available as open source. It's extremely important for what we're talking about today. To give you some context, because work with community and open source is very important in Red Hat's business, my team works for our Chief Technology Office. And at Red Hat, if you think about the life cycle of software and how we go to market and eventually add value and support our customer, we start in upfront in open source projects, understanding where those might benefit the customers we're serving, or where in the future that may serve our customer. That's why also research, which is chiefly academic research, and emerging technology and AI are all in our portfolio, because these are all very, future non-product stuff. So the work we're doing, I think I have the best job in the company, but don't tell my boss. I've been with Red Hat for almost 7 years. This month will be my 7th year at Red Hat. And this is the longest I have ever worked for a single company. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been hard to move on. I haven't had to move on to something else because the work is so interesting. For our group, we essentially act as Red Hat's center of excellence for open source best practices. We were not the first company to have an open source program office. In fact, as I'll discuss a little bit more, much of what open source program offices do in other companies are things that Red Hat has been doing so long that it's embedded in the engineering project. It's embedded in QE. So we have a little bit of a different focus. And I'll talk about what our areas of practice are in a bit more. But I also wanted to let you know that we're a highly distributed team. There are about 27 people on my team right now, and we're spread from Vancouver, BC, in British Columbia, all the way over to Singapore and Japan. Red Hat has a habit of hiring people where they live and work. We hire great people wherever they are. And much of our workforce is remote. In fact, this was one of the reasons it was a little bit easier for Red Hat. It was hard for everyone, but the pandemic for us to transition to remote work was a bit smoother, because we had already made significant investments in the kind of infrastructure you need to be able to work remotely. So, things like, IRC had been in place for many years. Teams have been working in open source communities. I believe at the time the pandemic started, 40% of our engineering team was working remotely, actually not in an office. On my team, there are only 2 people of 27 that actually work in an office when there's not a pandemic. One is in Helsinki, and the other is in an office outside of Boston, near our engineering headquarters. By the way, my background is from the Boston office. I tried to show you the one from the Czech Republic, but I couldn't find it. Our engineering headquarters, so to speak, is in Massachusetts. Our corporate office is in North Carolina and Raleigh. And our single largest engineering center, where we have the biggest pile of engineers, is located in Brno in the Czech Republic. So we have a good spread. It's really important. It gives a lot of diversity to our team and our thinking, so we don't get stuck in just US views, because open source is a global effort. So it is really helpful to us to have that kind of perspective, a lot of diversity on the team. So before I start, I want to explain some of the things that open source program offices generally do. For those of you that are still kind of learning a bit about it, and apologies to folks who already know, but we're going to go over this for a second. Some of the things that OSPOs do may include actually writing code to help an open source project in the company. Very often they're responsible for overseeing license compliance. They may have an attorney on their team or work closely with the company's attorney. They may have a program to train engineers so they understand how open source works and how to work with the tools and the culture. They also may bear responsibility for making a cultural change. If the company is not accustomed to open source and there's a level of discomfort in the company, they may have a program to try to change that. And they also may need to convince their lawyers or their management that open source is a good thing. They probably exist because at least one person was championing the idea, but they may still have work to go. For us, these are things that we get to take for granted. And we created our open source program office in 2014 in response to the fact that our engineers were so busy engineering that many of the things that are important to help communities thrive weren't being taken care of. So over the last 6 or 7 years, we've evolved to understand how we can really help be a good steward of communities, how we can participate without overbearing, and how we can make the communities around us successful. This is my management team. So I have 4 managers who lead about 6 different practice areas. And then I have an operations manager that helps us keep everything on track. The first team I'm going to talk about, so I can sort of wrap the activities around the structure, are community architects. Although we kind of flow with the work we do across the teams because everyone has a lot of knowledge in the area, we've structured it this way. We have a group of community architects whose primary job is typically to serve a specific community that's important and critical to Red Hat. And an example that would be Kubernetes or CentOS and CentOS Stream, Ceph and Gluster, which are storage communities. And in one case, we have someone in the Czech Republic that does general community advocacy for all of our groups, and so she's more regionally focused. And of course, we have Fedora as well. This is our community architecture and what they actually do. Now, sometimes you hear the phrase community managers, and that's similar. This has been an ongoing debate for years. Are there really community managers? Can you really manage a community? Because no one really owns the community. It's, you know, it's a group of its own. So we prefer to work with the idea of community architects because we help design and support. We try to think through where's that community want to go? What are their needs? We work with the stakeholders to understand what their objectives. You know, one community may see, we want more participants from industry because we need that, or they may say, you know, we just need more user adoption. But part of the process for these folks is to understand what the community needs and then help them move their project forward. And then, as I mentioned, these are some of the key projects for our team. Now, there are scores of other open source projects that we have community architects. Sometimes they're spread in other parts of the company, like Ansible, but we all work together to plan things like community events and other things. This is the community outreach team. Another way to think about it is it's the equivalent of marketing and intelligence for community. The person the person that works on documentation, he's referred to as a liaison. He's not actually writing the documentation for all the projects, rather he's sharing best practices, and he helps projects figure out how to actually find volunteers or best tools to organize it. So again, it serves as a center of excellence for this team. Some of the things, this is a shopping list of some of the things we do. I'm just going to hit on a couple of them. Community events is really big for us. We do a lot of very small funding of events and micro events for communities that we participate in. We typically make sure we're actually directly participating because we find that's is very meaningful. This group also generates a lot of the content that you'll see, and I'll talk about this a bit in a minute because it'll give you some resources to take away from the session. And then we also help with things like, you know, messaging and amplifying social media, things like that. And that's our outreach team. We also have a small community insight team we added about a year ago. And we're really fortunate to have a data science intern that's helping us shape up this program. And, you know, a lot of you may have read the book years ago called The Art of Community. And it is an art form, but there's also a lot of science that we'd like to develop. So there's things we can understand beyond mailing lists, like, you know, where are people talking about things? What communities are they showing up on? Where are the speakers talking about a project that you're interested in? We'd like to understand where communities are healthy. And this particular group provides a checklist. We publish most of what we do publicly. And again, I'll share that resource with you in a bit. So here's a lot of the content assets that are created by this team and others that they work with. And again, we'll share this deck with you. So after the event, so you'll be able to follow these direct links to find the places that are indexed in the slide. In the Red Hat corporate website, we have a presence for community there. We also maintain a blog, so we post articles that are of general interest to community and best practices there. The specific projects have their own communications platform. We're talking about just general purpose. How do you manage the community? You know, how do you pick a license? That kind of stuff. We also have a really valuable thing called the resource library, and you'll be able to find that too, that are short articles that are very clear that help you with different topics. We have one on water OSPOs. You know, we have another one on community metrics. We have another one on how to measure community health. We also produce a growing amount of video content, which is pretty exciting. We used to have an internal project called Community Central that was just for all of our community interested people inside of Red Hat. And we made a decision about 18 months ago to start publishing that externally so people outside of Red Hat could see what we were talking about, what our experience was, you know, things like how is it going implementing a code of conduct, or, you know, what's a best practice for mailing lists. So Community Central is now public. There's something called the Open Road. That's a couple of folks who are veterans of the wars and community who can chit chat about their experience and answer questions. Open source in business is about entrepreneurs and people that have created businesses and licenses and models, and it's a different topic, but it's fun and it's created by some folks on our team. And then Red Hat Research Days are also there, and you'll find more technical content on emerging technology ideas. And of course, you can always follow us on Twitter. Community infrastructure is something that was added about 2 years after I joined. And this was one of the few topics that I had enough technology depth to really help with. When I joined, originally, engineers were constantly creating a problem for corporate IT because they were asking, there's this tension where the engineers that work on open source want everything to be public, and all the IT folks in the company want to keep everybody out, right? So they have conflicting missions. So we created infrastructure that would be outside of Red Hat's firewall that would serve projects publicly. So it would be stable, secure, and add these kinds of references. And you'll be able to go and see some of the provided services we have and see some of the work this team is doing. We also have, this is probably the newest thing that we've added to our team. And it's been an interesting change in the industry in that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, a growing number of what we call industry verticals. So let's say, you know, telco or financial services, or most recently for us, automotive, are starting to try to use the open source development method to create their own software capabilities. And it's a little bit different. So it's not a traditional open source community where you have something that everybody uses ubiquitously, like a data center capability. You have people in the financial services industry who are saying, you know, we have this particular problem and we have this particular regulatory constraint or requirement. Is there somewhere we can develop that together? So this team is focused in that area. We've been working with telecom and networking for 6 or 7 years, and it exemplifies the kind of challenge we find here, where you will have companies that don't have prior experience working in open source, trying to figure out how to engage. They see it as a strategy, right? We saw the telecom industry disrupted. There's the internet, that kind of changed things. We started to think, okay, we need to think about networks differently. We're now talking about virtual networks and software-defined switching. So the industry is now trying to catch up. So part of Red Hat's challenge and opportunity has been to work with that industry and help them come along to understand how they can participate in open source communities. We're finding that consistently with all these different industries. So anyway, that's my comment. It's on the rise. These are the industries that we're focused on right now: telecom and networking, automotive, FSI, and then growingly energy and smart cities. And so I hope that is helpful. And I'm gonna think it, if I answer the questions that are asked. How active are we? Yes, I answered. I told you we're pretty darn active because everything we do is open source. Someone had asked how to get started. One of the things I'm going to share with you that's not in my deck is a brand new thing we started called Contributor Link. And I will send you the URL. And then we did this in partnership with another group at Red Hat, saying this kind of grew out of the pandemic. Like we want to figure out a way to get people started on projects. How can we match people that want to do projects up with projects that are out there looking for them? So I'm going to share that afterwards, and that's a good getting started spot. I also want to say that when you think about where you want to contribute, think about what you're most passionate about and find a community that's working in that space. It's a lot more fun when you can see yourself or your passions or your future career in a particular project. So it might be AI or machine learning, or it could be a humanitarian project because you want to see things done for public benefit, or a first responder project, or it could be something in the financial services industry. But if you have any trouble finding those, let me know and we'll hook you up, because there are ways to do that. But we did see that need because there's no other resource to do that kind of thing. Another thing that we do that is not common in other OSPOs, but we found it really important, is making sure that we are participating fully in software foundations. And so we did a really simple thing. We put all of the budget for all of the memberships in my management portfolio. So it gives us an opportunity to then make sure that the people that are participating or leading or representing Red Hat are still there, that they have the information they need, that we don't forget to renew our subscription. Some of it's very bureaucratic, but it's strategic because software foundations, especially for large companies, are really critical to participate in and to manage our relationship there. Red Hat has done many projects without benefit of a software foundation. But for some of these large, more complex projects in industries where they've not had experience before, they become critical as a neutral third-party platform that make both the business side of things and sometimes the attorneys more comfortable with collaborating that way. And so I'm pretty sure everyone knows what examples of those things are. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't spend a few minutes talking about the fact that my job is very fun, because most of the presentation I've shown you shows a lot of work that our team does. And it is a lot of work. It's a lot of fun work. The picture in Prague are with my colleagues that work in the Brno office most of them work on the RHEL team. And that was a Red Hat container that we had outside of the Prague conference center. The heat didn't work, so we had to go find blankets for people to cover their knees so they could come and do demos inside the container. The top picture, Leslie Hawthorne in the red shirt, is an ex-Googler. She created the Google Summer of Code program, and we're very fortunate to have her on our team leading our verticals. And next to her is Jen Krieger. She's our agile development guru. The picture, that's that heinous looking lobster on top of the car there. That's Brian Prophet, who's our social media guru and leads the community insight teams. And doing the dance in front of the lobster is Mike Perez, who's our CEF community architect. In the middle is the OSI board. I'm really grateful that Red Hat, as part of its contribution, allows its employees, encourages employees to participate in open source projects, governance, and foundations. And so they fund my travel to attend the meetings so the nonprofit does not have to. So that's another way we give back. And then on oh, here we go. There we go, my first glitch. There we go. I was trying to move a window. On the left side with a Guadic t-shirt is Karen Sandler, who's one of my favorite people in our ecosystem. She's the executive director currently of the Software Conservancy and is a longtime advocate and attorney in the space. Next is Ruth Seeley with the Cephalopod, who leads our community outreach team, and Bod, our folks that run our events, run our documentation, run some of our things. That was a team meeting in Orlando the last time any of us traveled and met together. So that is the heart of my my presentation. I don't know if I went through it faster than you wanted me to. I can back up and cover any points, but I thought maybe that would be a good starting point for discussion, or whatever you have in mind next. And I'm going to remind that you are on mute, sir.
Okay, now? Okay, awesome. Sorry. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. I think let me share. So folks, how we are doing with timing, that's great. Now, 1 second and get back. So we're gonna go for the Q&A session. So we're gonna have the live questions. And as I mentioned, it's a great time and opportunity to get some visibility and get to know you. And same time, we have already GitHub where you can post your questions. I think we're gonna repost that. We're gonna use, and we're gonna give some time for the break. So we're gonna get like 2-3 minutes and 1 second. And then we're gonna switch to 1 second. So. Okay, so yeah, we have a nice break, and I guess you can take time while think about some questions you have in mind. And then we're gonna go. So please raise your hand for the live questions. Okay, I think we have already raised hands. Sachin, Davra, you're gonna be the first. So. So we're gonna, in 10:40, we're gonna start with the questions. I don't, Debbie, do you need a bit more break, or do you think?
No, I'm good. In fact, I'm already in GitHub looking at some great questions. So I'll look forward to our discussion after the break.
Yep, yeah. We just do a short break, let the people kind of consume the information they get, and I think then come up with a bit time for the question, and then we go there. So usually, yeah, we have the mix, and I have so many questions myself. I think is it the topic I think we wanted to go for a while, and for the live questions, we have the Sachin, and I would engage more also live question. As mentioned, it's good for you. We want to learn about you as well, a bit more, but also GitHub fine as well. So we will, on your behalf, yeah, we'll bring it to. Awesome. I think we are good with the timing. Let's get started. And so we're gonna go. So Sachin, please.
Hi, Sako.
Yeah.
Thanks for giving the chance to ask the question live. So my question is, as I know that Red Hat has many projects which are graduated. So just wanted to know if there are any project which is Sandbox project, so that like the people who just started to contribute to the open source can start on that project. As I know that Ceph is a very matured and graduated project, so it's very large. And so just wanted to know if there is any project which is Sandbox and we can start contributing to that.
You know, I would love to ask someone on my team that question. I can give you a short list, and then I would really be happy to come back and follow up with some other suggestions. The Fedora community is very large and has a really diverse set of projects, and also has a great number of people to help. It's I think one of the more easy to get started for every community. They have very good documentation. They have good forums to seek help, and there's enough diversity in the project. I think you could probably find something there. And let me come up with some other ideas too.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sachin. And so let's go for the GitHub. I think Shtuti, she's asking, what are the prerequisites for getting started with open source? Again, there it's, I will connect it with more in a way that for Red Hat has a project. So usually when the beginners come, like more onboarding phase, and what is there any prerequisites?
Well, so The prerequisite is to have an interest in contributing. And that's really the prerequisite, because one thing that's very important to remember is that participating in an open source community doesn't always have to include code. So in fact, one of the challenges that every open source project has that seems not as exciting to some people is documentation. Most projects desperately need someone to help with documentation. And so, so the barrier to participate, to help with documentation, even to help with things that you may have skills in other areas like marketing or outreaching or writing or organizing events. There's so many ways, but the best thing to do is to ask, to let someone in the project know what your skill sets are, what your interests are, and ask them if there's something you can do to contribute. There are no prerequisites other than a willingness to contribute, and then to find some part of the project that would be most suitable for you to work on, that you'd be interested in.
Awesome. Thank you. I think Naman, she's asking, should we start with open source even when we are learning things, or so just learn and get more experience and then start?
Yeah, yes, I think that it should be part of, and so it's a very broad idea of learning things. If you're talking about technology, it should be part of anyone's education, but more generally, the idea of that permeates content, governance, access to information, sharing. The idea of open source is a powerful thing, and you should just include that in your thinking and philosophy. When I worked at Oregon State University, the first few years there at the lab, we actually didn't have any curriculum in open source at the university. And it wasn't until the students actually asked the faculty to please include it that it was included. So if you find yourself at some point in your education where you don't have access to that information, I encourage you to encourage that to be included. But I strongly encourage including that in your learning path.
Awesome. Thank you. So next question, Rasim asked. Rasim, do you want to ask live question?
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Question is that I want to know that how we can contribute while on job when learning related some the BRIPO or some open source project which is related the operating system. I mean, you have already mentioned about the Fedora community, and from the GitHub, from other resources, how we can contribute while on job and starting to learn to contribute open source projects.
That's a really great question, and that has been the focus of a lot of open source program offices, because not every company has a policy. So there's two ways to think about it. If you're a manager in a company and you would like to have your employees participate in something, you should have some kind of internal operational policy. For Red Hat, it's a simple thing to say everyone can contribute to open source whenever they want to, because everything we do is open source. For some companies, it may work with proprietary code and they have a concern about mixing them, then they have a legitimate question to ask: how can employees participate? If you see a project, so from an employee's perspective, if you see a project you think would make sense for you to contribute and you'd like to work on it, the best thing to do is talk with your manager about it. If your company doesn't already give permission for their employees to contribute, we have resources that help, many resources that help create policy. So as an example, Red Hat recently published its very long guidelines for participating in open source communities, which was written for employees so they could understand what the guidance was. We published that now in our resource library. You can grab that and see what Red Hat has done to create that structure. I think IBM, I talked to IBM recently, and I believe they've done the form of the same thing. but increasingly companies are publishing their own policy. So I'd start by asking if the answer is I'm not comfortable, I don't know, can you then offer to go find some resources? And the most compelling way though to change that is often for, especially if you're working with a manager, is to find his peer in another company, someone who has the same kind of job and who works in open source. And when they talk to each other, it really makes a big difference. But starting, if you're new and you're starting working on something that's not critical, that won't like break something important, is a good starting point. Start with something small. And I hope that answered the question in a couple of different ways.
Thank you. I have the second question too. You have mentioned about the curriculum related the open source projects. I mean, do you have some suggestion or some references or some shared experience with the how at the universities how we can do kind of the projects which will relate it in curriculum? I mean, like the study periods.
That's, I actually do have a good answer for you. There's a wonderful community of educators that started a community called Teaching Open Source. I believe it's teachingopensource.org. After the meeting, I'll make sure that you have that link. And it's a group of educators, mostly in higher education, some in secondary, what we call high school in the US, that share curriculum. So they share the content of their classes. They share tips for how to get the curriculum adopted at their university. And so there is a group that's out there doing that work. And I would go there and start looking around and find someone to help you. By the way, I didn't mention this in my talk, but having OSMOs at universities is also part of the new trend. There's you can probably Google this, but Johns Hopkins University, Saeed Chandra created an open source program office at Johns Hopkins, and they're leading. I was on a panel with them at the European Open Forum Europe about 3 months ago, and we're actually working on bringing that idea of having universities become more involved and having them create open source program offices for the same reason you do in industry. So you have cultural change, you have support. It can support advocating for in the operations of the university, in the policy of the university, and also in the curriculum of the university. I would look to that. We can include that in the follow-up. It's also a good resource as a reference model for what universities are doing now too at OSPOs.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Akil, you are the next, please, for the live question you have.
Thank you. Hey everyone. So my question is, everything has two sides, right? The pros and cons. So according to you, what are the cons or vulnerabilities of open source? Thank you.
So by network, what are the cons of open source?
What are the cons or the vulnerabilities that you see?
So the against, I'm sorry, it just broke up a little. The cons against using open source or working in open source?
According to you, what are the cons or anything? Your opinion.
In my opinion,
Yes.
In my opinion, I believe that you cannot derive the best benefit out of open source unless you're willing to commit to things like organizational readiness, where you're willing to invest in your developers to let them to set them free to adopt the tools they need. So the con is doing it halfway. I mean, an example of that is a company who thinks maybe they would like to do some inner sourcing so they can benefit from changing their culture, but they never actually get to the point where they're participating in external open source communities. So I would say the drawback is simply underestimating the level of effort it makes to take the change and not making the investment to making the move to open source. Is that helpful?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, thank you, Akil. We will go back to our GitHub question. Next, we have from the Fiza, and she or he asking for how to start coding in open source while learning things a academic and technology. I'm not sure if it duplicate that, but if you have any addition, please feel free.
Yeah, I think so if you're a student or you're just still studying, there are different groups that are focused on projects on campus. Frequently there are Linux user groups. I really, this is years ago they're called user groups. They're still user groups, but meetups and user groups that are local, and that happens on campus too. It's a great way to learn. It's a safe way to learn. People are patient and everyone's there to share advice and questions. So my suggestion would be to get in, one thing you do is get involved on campus or, through a professional association and ask people what projects they're contributing to and see what they're working on and how they like it. Take a little bit of time to figure out where you'd like to land. You'll learn that through reputation and through socialization with the people you meet along the way.
So as a follow-up question, is free software same as open source?
Well, that's the question of the century. In essence, it is. I think there's a philosophical difference in how it's looked at. I think the free software movement really wanted to make sure that people gain the benefit of open source and the freedoms that open source software affords, right? Freedom from vendor lock-in, freedom to use the code. All those values are embedded in the definition of the open source definition as the OSI describes it, but it was shifted from free to open in part really because the group that founded Open Source Initiative and created the OSD wanted to raise the comfort level of companies. And so for all practical purposes, it's all the same, the software affords all the same freedoms, but we just express it slightly different.
Okay, thank you. And Kanak, she's asking, do open source projects have a well-versed security of data? I will say that probably she means is the code secure or the data you put in open source project from security perspective?
Right. Remember, there's always a separation of the project, the software project and the code and the applications running and the data, right? Because the projects don't own the data. And like any software project, security of the code has to be built in. We tend to have a higher level of confidence with open source code because we can see what's in it. It doesn't come out of a black box. We call it mini eyeballs. So it doesn't mean it's infallible, but it's more apt to be secure. And when there's a problem, it's easy to correct quickly because it's not coming from a proprietary company that may wait a week and actually, do a patch update and not even let the customer know that it happened, which is one of the risks we have. So there's been a lot of research done. Dr. David Wheeler did a lot of research 15 years ago on the security of open source versus proprietary code and has published work on that. He's now working at the Linux Foundation and leads the effort that's responding to the US government's executive order on software supply chain. And so I would be more comfortable running open source code from a security point of view than not. But important work, and I think all developers will be more mindful of that, right, than they ever have been.
Yep. And I think Rasim has one more question, I think, because he's coming from the education background for universities. And so
this is same. She's all thus answered.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to add something to that answer though about that resource where you can go find curriculum, and this is a practice I really advocate. One of the U.S. universities, I think it's Rensselaer Institute of Technology, created a program that teaches open source by having students participate in humanitarian open source projects. And one of the reasons they chose that was because social science says that young women are more likely to become involved in science and technology topics, including computer science, if they feel there's some human public good in what they're doing. And so computer science engineering for years, women have fallen away from. It's been a trend that we were baffled because in the early days, it was mostly men. And so in bringing back opportunities to work in these humanitarian projects, they have a huge percentage of women in their courses. And so I just wanted to put in a plug for that. But they use humanitarian open source projects as a platform, exactly as you've mentioned, to use that as curriculum and a lab project.
Thank you. I think Sachin added one more question. How can I connect to Fedora community to know any Sandbox project? And I will say probably there is a link there in the website that how to connect this community.
Yeah, yes, you can probably go to the project website, but I'm going to ask Seiko to make sure I have your email address, and I'll connect you to someone directly to make sure you get an answer to your question.
Awesome.
Okay,
Thank you. I have also many questions, Dev. I'm not sure if it's the timing and how you feel. If you're good, we can go on. I have a lot of questions because open source office program, I think I will start with one. Currently in my current company as well, and from the friends overall in the market, I see a lot of companies, they use open source projects, but they don't have this office. And so I think also the question comes, how much investment will it require, how much engineering commitment, and then how it's going to help. Because usually there are so many interesting problems getting solved, but then doing them open source also require kind of governance around it, kind of community building, engagement. And so it's a bit probably you can talk about the outcomes also for the companies, what the companies, normal small to medium sized companies, because engineering investment, what's going to be outcome for them? But they use a lot today. That's
no, it's very true. And I spend a fair amount of time, as do people on my team, meeting. In my presentation, there's a thing I mentioned, it's called field engagement. I didn't talk about that too much, but one of the things we do is we work when someone who works in solutions, engineering and architecture or sales is working with a customer and they say, we would really like to open source this thing, or we are thinking about, trying to formalize using more open source. The question I always start with is to ask them why they want to participate in open source, because it's not the same thing. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the outcome a company expects depends on why they're participating. So for some, I worked with an insurance company once that simply wanted to have an opportunity to be able to make forms like everybody else in the industry and have them updated consistent with regulatory, and they wanted to be able to work with their competitors in a collegial way. So it wasn't that they weren't trying to save money, really. Another company may be trying to reduce their operational costs and trying to replace proprietary software. So they have a different agenda. So for every company, it starts with what is their agenda. It will typically be, in terms of investment, if they feel like they want to change the culture or change the way they're operating substantially, like changing a lot of the work they're doing, or excuse me, the infrastructure and applications they're using, then they may consider an open source program office. Or if a project in their portfolio is part of their business model and they want to elevate it and promote it, and they want a community manager, they may have an open source program office. It's often just one person. It's, Google has had a large, I don't know how many people they have there today. Google, I met my first open source program officer when I met Google in 2005 when I worked at the university, because they were willing to help fund the university project because we hosted some things that they thought were valuable to the community. And then I learned that they had things like Summer of Code. And so for Google, who's huge, there's this huge ecosystem, they rely on open source. I mean, that's how Google's made on open source. So they understood clearly what their investment was and why they wanted to seed it, why they wanted universities to do it, why they wanted students to do it. That was a very large early one. For most companies, it's often just one person who's the program officer who may be working with an attorney or have an attorney on their team, or maybe it's 3 people, maybe it's a program manager, a community manager, and someone who's working on licensing. So it's not like the number of people you have as much as it's the strategy, how you want to use open source, and what the task will be. Is it a sea change in the culture? Do you need to make sure that person is positioned in the company so they're more influential than being looked as a sort of a hobby advocate person who's got a something that isn't aligned with the rest of the company is doing? Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think that's the main takeaway. The company has to first ask question why, what they're trying to do, what's their target, just building this office inside. And then once they have this, either it's monetization or to get more customers or for hiring. So but the first question the company has to ask in management level. So as a follow-up, now let's say for the company, they should have it clear. But I have also often the colleagues and many friends, and they have a full-time, they work for big or small to medium-sized companies. And one of the questions, because now they need kind of put additional time, because if the company, they don't have this office and so on, they kind of need to put extra time. So the question would be, for these folks, how open source contribution, or from your experience, how they're going to help? It's going to help them from their career perspective. Will it give any value to moving there faster in their career? And
so I think I'm missing part of the context. So to help in the project, to help with their own career, or to help with the company culture?
So they probably, for example, most of the companies, they don't have this open source program office. So it means it's not part of their daily job. So they need to put extra time to find a project or start their own open source project. And how it's going to help you see that in accelerate their career? And
oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so I really recommend that if someone wants to do a project at work, that they find someone in the company that will advocate for what they're doing. Find a project that's aligned to something the company is working on, even if it's a social good project, right, that benefits their community. And they talk to their manager, and the manager says, I'm going to make sure someone in our PR department makes sure we write stories about it because it will be good for the company. So if the company can see whatever the benefit is, whether it's operational or a reduction of cost, or you now have access to a community of people that are solving the same problem, having an understanding of where it fits in the company is important. You don't have to have an open source program office, but you do need to make sure that the company is taking up, so recognizing the value of what you're working on, so you're supported, so it doesn't seem like it's something you have to drop because something else is going, and so it's acknowledged. It is. I believe that participation in open source projects is really critical. I don't like to see it as free labor, and that's been a problem for sustainability. I would like it to be part of their job description at work, or if they're independent, I would like to see a situation where they can be compensated. But sometimes, a lot of us do work, not just in software, that's volunteer to build our understanding of a community, understanding of an industry, and just make sure, you've got good relations along the way, that you document the work you're doing. Learn to write. You just have to, because not everyone can see your work. So find ways to share. These kinds of groups are wonderful. Doing YouTube videos, doing blog posts. Yeah, otherwise what you work on is just a well-kept secret.
And I will just tell you my answer, because they think we do outside. I think one of the main benefits for me to get to know or talk to people like Deb, and otherwise everybody has a full-time job, and that's really great for me, that to learn from industry leaders. And it's helping a way also from leadership perspective. I feel a lot with community working, and even though probably you are working in a small team and so on, but it gives you an open source to work in bigger scale community. That's for me that I think, pretty much, again, it comes what Deb said. It's what you're also trying and do, like more motivation. Yeah, what you have motivation, the problem and impact that you're trying to solve. That's really great. And I think the short part will be more for the folks. I think we have a lot of students as well there, and probably also from your experience, how it helps for while hiring, yeah. And if you see the contributors and so on for the rest.
Yes, judging by the number of people, that I know where I work that get job offers all the time, which fortunately most of them say no to. No, these are very highly demanded skills. There's lots of literature on the internet and, and industry articles about this. These are very demanded skills. Anything, that has to do with basic open source skills, containers, Kubernetes. I mean, there's a huge list of, there's pretty much no corner of open source where you will not be able to find a good job. And the good, so the hard news is this has been a very hard year for all of us with a pandemic. And, and people were hurt, and certain industries were hurt, and it's been a very challenging time. The industry that was least damaged was the technology industry, in part because many large companies already had their digital transformation initiatives in place. And rather than stopping their investment, they kept going because they knew they needed to be able to work remotely. They knew they'd need to be able to, their employees would need to be able to rely on these kinds of changes. And so there was a huge acceleration in open source projects. If you look at the Octoverse data that came out of GitHub, there was a 40% year-over-year increase in the number of projects on GitHub in that spring the pandemic started. It totally exploded. Number of students and teachers that were on GitHub went way up. And that's credit to people trying to solve difficult problems collaboratively. And so it's just, we don't see it letting up. I think open source skills are going to become incredibly valuable. And I would encourage people to, do it, whatever their path is, to continue to develop those skills. Someone had asked a question in the
Jamboard.
The Jamboard. Originally, they said out, how could I get involved with Red Hat off campus? And I think they've been like not working in most of our employees do work remotely. So if there are job openings at Red Hat, they're just as often open to remote employees as they are in person, if that's what they were talking about. Let's see, there was a question about campus. How can I?
Yeah, I think the one. How is it? Red Hat active and open source. What a prerequisite to get with open source, I think.
Oh, there it is in the middle. I'm looking forward to know how one can contribute to Red Hat and grab an off-campus opportunity. Yeah. So if you're talking about employment, go to Red Hat Jobs, and there's a lot of remote positions that are open there. If you're talking about contributing to an open source project, the same holds. And I'll follow up and send you some information on some of the communities we think have sandboxes people can play in, and other user-friendly communities to ramp in. And then the last question was, does Red Hat have mentorship programs for students? We do not have mentorship programs for students. We do have some internships on a limited number of campuses. And although that's kind of academic, sorry, bad pun, kind of academic right now, because you can't, no one's gone to a campus for a year. But I'll forward some information on what our internships program look like for you as a follow-up. So thanks for that question. Sorry, I missed it earlier.
Yeah. Deb, as I said, I have many questions. I hope whenever you tell us stop, I will stop. But if you don't mind, I will ask a couple more.
All right. My coffee is still in effect, so go.
Oh, okay, awesome. So that's one of the observation also with pandemic. Deb, most of the companies, they either close their internship or more hiring junior people because of in the pandemic and like working remotely, they feel like they will need more kind of help in a way that's why they even like for startups, they go with senior or plus more people. And do you see, for example, do you observe in the market, this is in general like this kind of pattern? And in this case, do you think for graduates or more junior people, the open source is one of the way kind of overcome this problem? So.
Well, it's an interesting question. So I didn't observe that with Red Hat. I'm not personally hiring engineers. I'm hiring people that have different skills, although some of them can engineer too. So we have a couple of positions we'll be opening soon that we're looking for people that are more junior just to create opportunities. But we can do that with some degree of confidence because we are all so accustomed to working remotely that we don't calibrate hiring someone who's more senior. So if that comment may come from a manager who's really used to managing in proximity, I think the people that had the most trouble during the pandemic from a business perspective were middle managers who had never worked remotely before, and they really had no idea how they were going to manage if people weren't in the room where they could touch their desks. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but it created a lot of anxiety for people, even for people in our corporate environment. It's like, I have never worked at home before. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'll figure it out. But for Red Hat, we have all the communications channels and our intranet with directions how to do things, and really welcoming a community of employees who will answer any questions without making people feel stupid for asking them. So it's an environment where it's easier to bring junior people in. I would not hesitate to apply for a job just because you don't have a lot of experience yet. You can get your experience on your CV by working in an open source project. I will tell you that I do know that hiring managers that go look at GitHub first before they finish reading the resume because they like to see if someone's had experience, right?
Yep.
Not a really a qualitative judgment, but it just lets them know if they're there that they know how it works. That's a commonly used tool and platform. They know how to work with others in that environment, and so it says a lot. So just being in GitHub and doing commits on anything will give you gold stars on your list for your interview.
Yep, thank you. I just want to say quickly hi to our friend Vurgun, who joined, and he's CTO at ATL Tech, and he's flying back to Azerbaijan. He's sitting in the airport. Vurgun, thank you. I think he's so excited.
I forgot what airports look like. I'm glad to see an airport. That was exciting. Can we see you again?
Yeah, he's flying back, and I think he's one of the also main contributors for the Go project. Thank you, Vurgun, for making. I'm sure that you will be able to check the recording, the missed part. So I think that my next question would be, I'm trying to, on behalf of, try to think from all these organizations, from company, the junior people, senior people, and obviously one of the other thing from a university, schools perspective, from education perspective, because like looking more future, because I was student, we also did like as a school project, and I think in my history mentioned Job Hacks project, which was quite successful. And I see also a lot of time in the university, they do like random small project. They don't do open source, but sometimes there are some great ideas that potential can be their own company and so on. But there is also lack of a bit guidance or mentorship from the professors in a way that how you see this coming more changing in coming like in coming years, or you think like having this program office inside schools also will accelerate, because license and all this stuff kind of requires some also knowledge? And
yeah, I believe it will. So universities typically go to industry and say, all right, what do you need? So you'll hire our students when they graduate, right? It's really important to them. What will what money will you give us so we can give you what you need? How can we work together? And that discussion when I was at Oregon State University happened with Dr. Daniel Fry, who is the executive vice president of open systems for IBM in 2005. And his answer to that question was, I need more graduates that have open source skills. And that's what like turned the key in the lock at the university, where their curriculum, they're teaching open source curriculum. They've been doing it for years. That curriculum, by the way, is also open for any university to use. It's a public institution, and that's part of their mission. And I think increasingly we will see campuses adopt it, but it typically takes at least one person on the campus that understands it. At least one person that can advocate for it. A program office would be helpful. And the experiences students can get, I think, are most effective when they actually have. So as an example, at OSU, you have to actually contribute to an open source project to graduate from the class. It can be a bug fix. It can be documentation. It doesn't matter. They just want to know that you figured out how to use GitHub and you figured out how to talk to a community and you have that skill. And I think you'll see that continue. It's just too pervasive. Universities tend to move very slow, but once they get it, it's not that difficult to start incorporating into curriculum.
Awesome. So, and in this case, it will be also, this office will require the training for the using like more internal staff and for the professors and in general to build.
It can. So as an example, at Oregon State University, we didn't call it an open source program office, but a group of us that were managing the open source lab. At the time, it actually hosted the Linux kernel for a number of years. It still hosts the Drupal project. It hosts Apache Foundation's infrastructure, Mozilla Foundation's infrastructure. It was a unique moment in time where there was just a need for community on, for those telecom people. It's like an OC 192 to the internet backbone. We had our own fiber. And so it made a unique set of circumstances that we had data center capacity and high speed access so we could host these really popular projects, and starting with a Firefox browser. And so we had a case to do those things, but it also grew into a center where we started doing things like Drupal training, because the university decided they wanted to save money by using an open source CMS. And so providing training, but again, it has to be developed according to the university's strengths and their needs. And so I don't think you can cookie cutter them. You have to see, who's on the campus, what's working. In the case of Oregon State University, what got them started? All the departments are running our own email servers. They insisted they all run their own email servers until spam crippled them to the point where they couldn't run their own email servers anymore. So we brought in Spam Assassin or something, and it was open source, and we solved world hunger on campus, so to speak, because we fixed their email. And that was the beginning of open source being accepted on that campus, because it saved them money and it saved them a lot of headache. Every university will have some problem they're trying to solve, or if you can meet open source solving a problem, then the resistance to bring it on campus will diminish.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think more they have these also the bindings, more the companies will be more willing to collaborate and hire more from the university. This is also their main metrics they can
absolutely. Yeah, they'll have an opportunity there. And we also, because we had a unique program, we were able to get direct funding into the computer science department, into the lab, because they were interested in having to attract more students. I mean, every student we graduated went directly to Google or Mozilla or Facebook, or all the companies in the earlier days that really understood the value of open source. Now they go everywhere.
Awesome.
Those skills, yeah.
So Deb, now I want to a bit also speak from student perspective, but not the one who are trying to get hired, but more from entrepreneurship mindset. Yeah. So that's one of the things. Also talking to investor and so on, because like usually they have less experience and so on. Putting project as open source, and what are the challenges, or what would be your recommendation? Yeah, they kind of in the school they started their own open source project. They're kind of trying to build or monetize it and make them kind of more full-time job. And talking to investor, convincing all these, and what are the pros cons you think will be to make it open source or versus just go closed source?
Right, Terry. Yeah, well, I mean, it's still possible to build a piece of software and sell a license to it, but that model is fastly fading, because even in the moment that the software is developed, it had a lot of value and impact. The cost to maintain it and to continue to innovate diminishes, and so you lose the value of innovation. The open source community and the development model bring all kinds of ideas and resources and talent to a project that you would not have. And I think there are decreasing opportunities to write software and pay back your college tuition with it. It's more likely that you'll be involved in a project or involved with a company that starts a project. Now, I will mention one of the interesting newer foundations is Cross. See if I can remember what it stands for. Out of University of Santa Cruz in California is the Lacrosse Institute, and it is a commercial, I think it's a commercial resource for open source software. It was funded by Sage Wheel, who was the founder of the Ceph project and had a company called Ink Tank for a few years that Red Hat acquired. And that's how Red Hat became involved and invested in Ceph storage. But Sage did a really generous donation to the university, and they started something called the Lacrosse Institute. And their focus is helping students convert their open source project idea into commercially viable business models. And so I would invite you to take a look at what they're doing there, because they have some great ideas and they've been thinking about it more than I have. But they just asked me how things went in the Oregon State University first before they started a new one. So I got to see the early days, and they're doing really wonderful work there. The woman I mentioned, Karen Sandler, who's the executive director of the Software Conservancy, she's actually a volunteer board member at Cross Center.
I love that you are giving so many ideas, and it's free, and I'm so happy.
Well, I'll tell you what we can do is maybe we can come back and do another session on a completely different topic. Or if your members have something in particular they'd like to have someone besides me come back and talk about, like, getting started on projects or where the sandbox is, then let me know, and I'd be really happy to help provide that resource.
Yes, thank you so much, and it's really enjoying. And I think I tried to cover most of the kind of players or the friends around that they would cover. I think last but not least would be about the community itself. Yeah, I think we still early stage started. We have some attraction. Thank you. We can have speakers like you, but we are still a bit trying to figure out in a way that how we can build the organization board. Yeah, like, and because of the sustainable and keep as open as we can and grow community. To be honest, our target was like 100,000. I think the idea was there is also another players, not just also non-tech people that in different field, and we see like it's really a model. It can be also applied. Yeah, like it can be HRs can join. They can have, I don't know, like marketing people, sales people, all these people can be on board. It's not that open source. It's not just for engineers purely, but it can be all this community this model, because it's all about the open source. I think first thing is about the culture. If you have build right culture people, and they can kind of collaborate and kind of do more things together. It's when you are kind of also building your company or any open source, you need also domain expertise people, not just people who can code. And my question will be is for you have seen the story I shared and a bit more. What are the recommendation things for us, for the team overall? So I think we have like 3 directions, as mentioned. Just I will briefly mention. One is like doing events and to learn from industry experts like you. Second, more for junior people, how we can onboard and get them experienced. And third, we have more accelerated when they're already in place where they want to take it to build a team, like, and take it to the next level, which you mentioned. Couple organizations we're going to check out where they help you build MVP and so on. So from these 3 directions we have, and your recommendation, we'll love to hear. Just some thoughts.
Well, thanks. Well, first of all, I love the way you set up the meetings and how inclusive and collaborative it is. I've been in more than one meeting where people were shy about asking questions. You've made it so easy for people to participate, and that's a great model. I really appreciate that. You have a very broad aim, which sometimes may make it more challenging for people to understand why they should come, right? what are you doing? What will they gain? So you can think about as if you've never heard of yourself. Have someone come interview you and ask you questions about what you're doing, and try to make the story simple enough that people can take it in easily. I think providing educational resources is wonderful, and creating something that's kind of like a sometimes they refer to them as a community of practice, rather necessarily as opposed to a user group. So a community of practice all come together because they're interested in some values. Figure out there may be more than one audience for that. It makes it more difficult to make sure that the education you have is targeted to it. But I would say just spend some time thinking together with your group, because you have a really wonderful group around you. Think about being really clear. Who do you want to work with and serve? What is the message and the value of them participating, and how can they contribute? How do you want people to contribute, right? A call to action, what they can do to, and if you can refine that a bit, that's kind of a marketing exercise, right? It's the elevator pitch. If you're in Silicon Valley, you have to have your elevator. What's your elevator pitch, and who are you talking to in the elevator? That'd be my advice as a place to start.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's all also first thing for us also more make it in a way that decentralized and also hide it from the community. That's one of the reasons that we try as much also recognize and talk to community members who are joining events, because we see that it's a sign of good passion for the open source and just eager to learn wherever they are. And I think last one more question, which you already touched about, we try as much also diversity, inclusivity, and we still are having hard time in a way that to find more female speaker leaders, for example. That's one of the challenges always. We try as much in each chapter 10 session to bring, but like for our best case would be like 5 female speaker, 5 male. So that's one of the just challenges in overall. What are your recommendations that to handle these kind of challenges and in general to be more as diverse?
Yeah, so this is a question that, especially in the United States, we're really struggling with on every level, whether it's community or company or our neighborhood. So I appreciate the question. I'll give you the best answer I can. First of all, the easy one to answer about, we're looking for more diversity in speaking is just to ask someone for some recommendations. I can give you a list of, a dozen women that would be more interesting to hear speak, not just women. Don't look just like me, but are similarly different than maybe some of the speakers you had. The second piece of that is that you've laid some really good groundwork in terms of creating a code of conduct and having a shared value with a group. You need to you need to identify some as an example, some of the women or other underrepresented people in the group you have now, and ask them for help. It's like, can you give us your perspective? What are we doing that's helpful? What do you think we're not doing? What should we stop doing? So talk to the people that are underrepresented about how they want to be represented. And I think that's a good start, but you've got so many practices that are welcoming that I wouldn't recommend changing anything you're doing, only to just have a conversation and see what else you can do that would be more welcoming.
So Deb, we have more follow-ups on that. I think we will take it because we really appreciate that. I'm sure that you have a bigger circle in industry that you can recommend us when we are limited with that speaker chunk. So thank you so much. I think we are a bit over time, but I will go there.
I don't hear anyone snoring, so I think we did okay.
Yeah,
or
I think
on mute. I want to thank your audience. It was really a pleasure meeting with your group, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I think we tried as much from cover all the organizational perspective. And folks, if you're watching later or if you have later any questions, please feel free, reach out Deb directly. I'm not sure that LinkedIn, how it's easy getting filled up, but in case you can also ask in GitHub or Slack us, and we will try to kind of batch them, and also kindly ask Deb if she get time to answer. And or yeah, she can help to direct you to the folk maybe that they will have answer. But otherwise, I would like one more time, thank you, Deb, and for such a great talk, such a great taking all the questions we had. so many ideas you gave. We are in a stage that we really look for more ideas, more, because I think being more strategic, having these inputs will help also to have a more, build the community in the right way, because it's not about we fail and so on. We also want to community grow in the right direction as much, and without any depend on any benefits. That's, I think, for the open source, that's a thing we always try to move forward. And one more time, I love your LinkedIn, and it's so easy. I'm sure that already we recognize it, open government. And Deb, yeah, and anything and everything.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deb, and thank you, folks, for joining. It was a pleasure. I know that most of the folks also joining from India. It's late there. We hope you enjoyed it, and looking for you in next weeks for our another amazing sessions we have. So thank you.